The old man stands alone on the sidewalk outside the diner, his dress uniform pressed flat against a body that no longer fills it the way it once did, and through the fogged front window a young woman in an apron is shaking her head no. Snow drifts sideways down the main street of Halford Junction, fine and dry, the kind that does not melt so much as collect in the seams of things. Elias Maddox does not move. He has been turned away from doors before, in other countries, in younger years, and he learned a long time ago that a man keeps his shoulders square when the answer is no. So he stood there, 81 years old, his garrison cap level, the ribbons on his chest dulled by 4 decades of closet dark, and he waited to understand what he had done wrong. He had done nothing wrong. That was the part that would take the rest of the day to come out, and it would take a question from a man not yet arrived to pry it loose. A bell over the door had rung when he tried to enter. The warmth had reached him first, coffee and griddle grease and the low murmur of a Tuesday lunch crowd, and for one breath he had felt the pull of an ordinary thing, a hot meal, a booth by the window, a cup he did not have to wash himself. Then the young woman had stepped into his path with both hands raised, not touching him, only blocking, and she had said the words she had clearly been told to say. "We are not seating walk-ins right now, sir." She had not met his eyes when she said it. The booth by the window was empty. 3 booths were empty. He counted them on his way back out into the cold. If this story stays with you, take a moment to follow along and watch it through to the end, because what the old man could not see from the sidewalk was already on its way down the highway. His grandson was 40 miles out and closing, a Marine named Booker Maddox driving a dented gray pickup with a German shepherd sitting upright in the passenger seat. The dog was named Shasta. She had been with Booker through one last deployment and 2 years of the quiet after, and she rode the way she always rode, eyes forward, ears tracking every truck that passed, her weight settled, but never asleep. Booker had not planned to be on this road today. His grandfather had called the night before and asked, in the careful way old men ask for things they have decided they do not need, whether Booker might be passing through Halford Junction sometime soon. Booker had heard the thing under the words. He had left before dawn. The Copper Spoon sat at the corner of Main and Depot, a low brick building with a tin awning and a hand-painted sign that had been there since before Booker was born. His grandfather had eaten breakfast in that diner every Sunday for 30 years. He had brought Booker there as a boy, had ordered him silver-dollar pancakes, and watched him drown them in syrup, had introduced him to every cook and waitress by name as though the boy were someone important. That diner was stitched into the old man's week, the way church was, the way the cemetery visit on the first of the month was. It was not a place he went. It was a place he belonged to. So when Booker rolled into town a little after 1 o'clock and saw his grandfather sitting on the cold iron bench across the street from the Copper Spoon, alone, in his dress uniform, with no coffee and no plate, and no reason to be sitting outside in falling snow, something in his chest went very still and very quiet. He parked the truck. Shasta was watching the old man through the windshield before Booker had the key out of the ignition, her body gone forward and alert, a low sound starting in her throat that was not a growl and was not a whine. She read the bench before Booker did. She read the way the old man was sitting, the stillness of him, the cold that had crept into his hands. Shasta rarely made that sound without reason. Booker had learned to trust it more than he trusted most. Things people said out loud. He let her out. She crossed the street ahead of him and went straight to the old man and pressed her head against his knee, and Elias Maddox put one weathered hand on the dog's skull and let out a breath that fogged in the air and did not come back steady. "You are early," the old man said. I left early, Booker said. He sat down on the bench beside him. The iron was cold enough to feel through his jacket. Up close, he could see the snow collecting on his grandfather's shoulders, on the brim of his cap, melting where it touched the ribbons and beading there like the place had been weeping on him. How long have you been out here? He asked. Ilias looked at the diner a while, he said. That was all he said. A while. Booker followed his grandfather's gaze across the street, to the fog window of the Copper Spoon, to the warm amber light inside, to the empty booths, and he began slowly to understand that the cold his grandfather was carrying had not come. He did not ask the question yet. That would come later, and when it came, it would be a small question, almost gentle, and it would do more damage to the people inside that diner than any shouting could have done. For now he only sat with the old man and the dog, and let the snow fall on all three of them, and he waited until his grandfather was ready to tell him what had happened. It came out in pieces. Ilias had put on the uniform that morning because it was the 22nd of the month, and on the 22nd of every month he wore it to breakfast in honor of a man named Carl Reyes, who had not come home from a river crossing in 1968. And he had done this quietly for so many years that the staff at the Copper Spoon knew to set a second cup at his table and leave it empty. He had walked the 4 blocks from his house. He had reached the door, and a young woman he did not recognize had stopped him at the threshold and told him there was no room. There is always room, Ilias said. I have eaten there since before that girl was born. Booker looked at the empty booths again. Who told her to say that? He asked. The old man did not know. That was what sat heaviest on him, Booker could see. Not the cold, not the indignity of being turned out into the snow in front of whoever happened to be walking down Main Street. It was that he could not account for it. He had spent his whole life believing that if you did right by a place, the place did right by you, and now a door he had earned the right to walk through had closed in his face for a reason no one would name. Booker stood up. Shasta rose with him. Instantly, her shoulder against his leg. Wait here, he told his grandfather. Stay warm. We are going to go find out what room they have. He did not go in, angry. That was the discipline of it, the thing the Corps had ground into him over years he could not get back, the thing that separated him from the version of himself that wanted to put a fist through the fogged glass. Anger was a tool you used once, and then it was gone. He had something better than anger. He had a question, and he had not asked it yet, and he had a dog who could tell him which person in that room was lying. The bell over the door rang. When he pushed it open, the warmth hit him the way it had hit his grandfather, coffee and griddle and the close human smell of a lunch crowd, and a dozen faces turned toward the door and then dropped to the German shepherd at his side. Shasta came in low and steady, her ears forward, her eyes moving across the room, one person at a time. Booker stood just inside the door and let the room look at him. He was in civilian clothes, a canvas work coat and boots, nothing that marked him as a Marine except the way he held himself, which was enough. The young woman in the apron came toward him, with her order pad already up like a small shield. Sir, we cannot have a dog in the dining room, she said. She is a working dog, Booker said. His voice was low and even. He was not looking at the waitress. He was looking past her across the dining room to a man at the back who had risen from a corner booth the moment the bell rang. The man was somewhere in his 50s, dressed too well for a diner in a snowbound town, a charcoal overcoat folded over the back of the booth, and a slate-gray dress shirt open at the collar, a tablet propped against the napkin holder in front of him. He had the smooth, unhurried look of a man who had walked into 100 small businesses and made them smaller. He came down the aisle between the booths with his hand already extended and a smile already arranged on his face. "Garrett Vole," the man said, "I managed the transition here. Is there a problem?" Shasta stopped walking. She did not growl. She simply stopped, planted, her eyes fixed on Garrett Vole, and the hair along her spine rose in a single slow ridge. Booker felt the change in her through the leash he was not holding, through the air between them. She had read 40 people in that room in under a minute, and she had stopped at exactly one. Booker had seen her do this on 3 continents. She had never once been wrong about a man. "There is an 81-year-old veteran sitting on a bench across the street," Booker said, "in the snow, in his dress uniform. He came in for breakfast, like he has done every week for 30 years, and your staff turned him away. There are 4 empty booths behind you. So yes, there is a problem. I would like to know what it is." The smile on Garrett Vole's face did not move, but something behind it adjusted. "We are not currently seating," he said. "We are in a soft, close period during the ownership transition. It is nothing personal. I am sure your grandfather understands." "I did not say he was my grandfather," Booker said. The silence that followed was the first crack in the wall, and everyone in the room heard it, and Garrett Vole heard it most of all. Booker did not raise his voice. He let the quiet do its work. Then he asked the question he had carried in from the cold, the small question, the only one that mattered, and he asked it as though he genuinely wanted to understand. "If you are soft-closing," he said, "why is the open sign on? And why are these people eating? And why did you let me walk in, but not him?" Garrett Vole opened his mouth and found nothing in it. A woman in the second booth set down her fork. She was 60, maybe older, in a quilted vest and a knit cap she had not taken off. And she had been listening the whole time the way the whole room had been listening. "Tell him," she said to Vole. Her voice was flat and tired. "Tell him what you told us." Booker looked at her. "What did I tell you?" he asked. "That regulars are bad for the numbers," the woman said. She did not look at Vole when she said it. She looked at Booker and through him to the bench across the street. "He had a meeting here 3 weeks ago. The whole staff. He said the buyers want a clean room. He said the old folks who sit for 2 hours over 1 cup of coffee, the ones who come for the company, they make the place look like a place where nobody spends money. He said we were supposed to make them feel unwelcome until they stopped coming. He used a word for it. What was the word?" "Attrition," said a man across the aisle. He did not look up from his plate. He used the word attrition. "Attrition," the woman repeated, like they were supposed to just wear off, like rust. Booker stood very still in the middle of the warm room, and let that land. Light. He thought about his grandfather on the cold bench, the snow on his ribbons, the empty cup he set out every month for a man who died in a river before Booker was born. He thought about the word attrition, which he had heard before, in briefings applied to enemy strength. He had never heard it applied to old men who wanted a place to sit. He turned back to Garrett Vole. "Is that true?" he asked. "It is a business decision," Vole said. The smile was gone now. The voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of a man reading from a script he had read in many towns. The new ownership has a concept, a demographic. The previous clientele does not fit the concept. No one is being denied anything they are entitled to. We have the right to refuse service. I would suggest you take your dog and your grandfather and go." Shasta's lip rose off her teeth. She still did not growl. She simply held him in her gaze the way a thing that has decided about you holds you. And Garrett Vall, who had not been afraid of the room a moment ago. Booker put a hand down toward the dog, and she settled instantly, the ridge along her spine going flat. He did not need her to do anything else. He had what he came for. He had the truth, and he had it in front of 40 witnesses. And the man who built the lie had spoken it out loud in a room full of people who had been sick about it for 3 weeks. He did not threaten Garrett Vall. He did not put a hand on him. He turned around and walked back out into the snow, and the bell rang behind him, and he crossed the street to where his grandfather was sitting with the cold deep in his hands, and he crouched down in front of the old man so they were eye to eye. "I know why now," Booker said. "It was not you. It was never you. There is a man in there being paid to push out everyone who made that place worth keeping, and he just told the whole room what he is doing." Elias Maddox looked at his grandson for a long moment. Then he looked across the street at the diner he had loved for 30 years, and something moved in his weathered face that was not quite anger and not quite grief. And he said very quietly, Carl would have hated this. He hated a man who picked on the people who could not pick back. "Then we are not going to let him," Booker said. What he did next, he did slowly over days and not with his fists. The Corps had taught him that the way to take a position was rarely the fast way. He drove his grandfather home and got him warm and made him eat. He fed Shasta. He sat at the old man's kitchen table that night under a yellow ceiling light while snow piled against the windows, and he started making a list. And the list was not of grievances. It was of names. Every regular his grandfather could remember, every old hand who had been pushed out of the Copper Spoon in the last 3 weeks. By morning, the list had 30 names on it, and Booker understood that his grandfather was not the first person Garrett Vall had turned out into the cold. He was only the first one with a grandson who came when he called. The next morning, Booker started knocking on doors. He found a retired postal carrier named Gideon Whitcomb in a narrow house with a flag bracket on the porch and a snow shovel leaned beside the door. Whitcomb came to the screen in a cardigan with a coffee mug in his hand, and when Booker said the words Copper Spoon, the old man's face closed up like a fist. 26 years, Whitcomb said. Lunch, every working day, a club sandwich and a black coffee. 26 years, and a boy in an apron tells me my booth is reserved. He laughed once with no humor in it. There were no reservations at the Copper Spoon. You could not have reserved a booth there if you had called the governor. Booker wrote it down. He asked Whitcomb what day it was. The old man told him to the date, because a man remembers the day he was made to feel like he was in the way. He found a widow named Frances Okafor in a small, clean kitchen that smelled of cinnamon and old paper, and she did not want to talk until Shasta came in and lay down at her feet, and then she could not stop. Every morning since my Marcus passed, she said, I went and I sat in our seat, the one by the radiator, and I had my one egg and my one toast, and I did not bother a soul. She turned the wedding ring on her finger as she spoke. They started putting me at the little table by the kitchen door. She said the one with the short leg. The cold came right through under that door onto my ankles. 3 Tuesdays they did it, and I am old, but I am not stupid. I know when I am being moved to the bad table on purpose. And so I stopped going. I stopped going to the last place I had with him. She said it without tears, which was worse. Booker wrote that down too. He found a man named Sutter who had run the hardware store on Main for 40 years before he sold it, a wide, stooped man with hands like roots, and Sutter did not say much at first. He went to a drawer in the hall and took out a folded slip of paper and put it in Booker's hand without a word. It was a check, an actual check drawn on the account of the regional restaurant group, made out to Sutter for the exact price of one breakfast, $4.90, with a printed note clipped to it that said the establishment hoped he would find a dining experience. "They paid me to stop coming," Sutter said. "40 years on that street, and they wrote me a check to go away. I never cashed it. Did not seem like the kind of thing a man should spend." He folded Booker's fingers over it. "You keep it," he said. "You might need it more than I do." Each of them had thought it was only happening to them. Each of them had carried it home alone and decided, the way proud people decide, that they would simply stop going rather than make a scene. None of them had known there were 30 others. Garrett Vall had counted on exactly that. He had built his attrition, one quiet humiliation at a time, each one private, each one deniable, because a man who is ashamed does not compare notes with his neighbors. The thing Vall had not counted on, Shasta came with Booker to every door. The old people who would not have opened up to a stranger opened up to a man with a working dog at his side, because there is a thing that happens between elderly hands and a calm, large dog, a thing older than language. Frances Okafor talked to Shasta for 10 minutes before she said a word to Booker. By the end, she was telling him everything, one hand buried in the dog's ruff, and Shasta sat through all of it without moving, her eyes half closed, taking the weight of a lonely woman the way she had been bred and trained to take weight. On the third day, Booker learned the part that turned a sad story into a fight worth winning. He learned it in the basement of the county building at a long table under a buzzing fluorescent tube, with a clerk who slid a thick folder across to him and went back to her crossword. The copper spoon was not being sold to a stranger. It was being sold to a regional restaurant group, and the regional restaurant group qualified for a small business revitalization grant from the county, a grant of $40,000, awarded specifically to operators who would preserve a community gathering place that served the town's existing residents. Garrett Vall had filed the application. Booker found it because the application was a public record, and public records were a thing a patient man could request, and Booker was nothing if not patient. He had filled out the request form in block letters and waited 2 days for the clerk to pull it, and he had spent those 2 days driving to more doors, gathering more names, so that when the folder finally came, he would know exactly what he was looking at. He read it twice. The application ran to 9 pages, and most of it was the bland language of money asking for money. But page 4 had a paragraph that made him stop. The application said the Copper Spoon would remain a welcoming hub for longtime residents and seniors. It used the word seniors 3 times on that single page. It promised continuity of service to the town's existing community. It said this in writing. It was signed by Garrett Vall in a small, tight signature at the bottom of page 9, dated 3 weeks before the morning he turned Elias Maddox out into the snow. The grant money was contingent on it. And here was the thing that made Booker close the folder and sit very still for a moment in the cold, buzzing light of the county records basement. Garrett Vall was being paid $40,000 of public money to keep the diner welcoming to exactly the people he was being paid by the buyers to drive out. He had told the county one thing and his staff the opposite, and both things could not be true, and Booker now had both of them in writing, signed and dated, in the same man's hand. He asked the clerk if he could pay for copies. She said 10 cents a page. He copied all 9 pages twice and paid her $1.80 out of his pocket and folded the copies into his coat against his chest like something that could be lost. He did not go to Garrett Vall. He went instead to a county grants administrator named Lorna Brandt, whose name was on the award letter, and he laid the folder on her desk. He laid out the application, he laid out the 30 names, he laid out Sutter's uncashed check, the actual check, with the actual note. And he said, very evenly, that he was not there to make trouble. He was there because the county had paid a man to keep a place welcoming, and the man was using the county's money to do the opposite, and he thought she would want to know before her name was on the wrong side of it. Lorna Brandt was a careful woman with reading glasses on a chain and 40 years of paperwork behind her. She read every page. She looked at the check the longest. Then she took off her glasses and said, "I approved that grant." I sat in the room when he promised me. She looked up at Booker. "Why didn't any of these people come to me?" she asked. "Because they thought they were the only one," Booker said. "And because a man who has been made to feel like rust does not go to the county, he just stops coming." Lorna Brandt was quiet for a while. Then she said, "The grant has a clawback clause. If the operator violates the terms, the county can revoke the award and recover the funds." She tapped the folder. "This is a violation. This is 30 violations." It would have been easy, then, to let the county do the work, to let the paperwork grind Garrett Vall down from a distance. That was not the ending Booker wanted, and he knew it, because grinding a man down on paper would not put his grandfather back in his booth. It would close the diner or sell it to someone worse, and the warm amber light in the window that the whole town had grown up under would go dark either way. What the old people needed was not Garrett Vall punished. What they needed was their place back. So Booker asked Lorna Brandt for one more thing. He asked her not to revoke the grant. He asked her to enforce it. She looked at him over the glasses. "Enforce it," she said. "The grant says the place stays welcoming to long-time residents and seniors." Booker said, "So make him keep that promise. Make the welcome a condition of the money in writing with an inspection, and tell the buyers that the $40,000 and the property's grandfathered zoning both ride on it. They do not want the old people gone because they hate them. They want them gone because a consultant told them old people are bad for the numbers. Change the numbers, make the welcome worth more than the attrition." Lorna Brandt sat back in her chair and looked at the Marine and his dog for a long moment, and then, for the first time in their conversation, she smiled. It took 11 days. Booker spent them the way he spent everything. He brought the 30 regulars together, not all at once, but in 2s and 3s at his grandfather's kitchen table, and he showed them they were not alone, and he watched the shame go out of them and something steadier come in. Gideon Whitcomb, the postal carrier, turned out to know the county zoning code better than the county did. Frances Okafor turned out to have kept every receipt from every breakfast she had ever eaten at the Copper Spoon, a shoebox of them, going back to the year her husband died. And when she set the box on the table, she said, "I knew I was keeping these for something." Sutter, who had given up his check, turned out to still know every contractor and supplier in 3 counties, and he started making calls. The buyers, when the full picture reached them, did the thing that institutional money usually does when the math turns. They cut Garrett Vall loose. A man who had promised the county one thing and instructed the staff to do the opposite was, it turned out, a liability the regional restaurant group did not care to own, and they discovered their concern for the long-time residents of Halford Junction with remarkable speed once $40,000 and a zoning variance depended on it. Garrett Vall was gone from town within the week. He did not face anyone. He did not apologize. He simply was not there one morning. The corner booth empty, the tablet gone, the way men like him are always somewhere else when a bill comes due. That, too, was the truth of it, that the system he had served was bigger than he was and discarded him as easily as he had tried to discard 30 old men and women. And there was no reckoning grander than that quiet dismissal, no apology owed and none given. He had wanted them to wear off like rust. In the end, he was the one who wore off. What stayed was the diner. On the morning the Copper Spoon reopened under the enforced terms of the grant, with a new manager hired from the town itself and a clause in writing that the longtime residents of Halford Junction were not merely permitted but wanted, Booker drove his grandfather down Main Street in the dented gray pickup with Shasta sitting upright between them. It was still winter. Snow lay clean and white along the curbs, and the awning of the Copper Spoon wore a fresh line of it like a fold of bunting. The old hand-painted sign had been cleaned, but not replaced. Through the front window the lights were on, warm and amber against the gray morning, and the booths were full. They were full of the 30. Gideon Whitcomb was in his usual booth. Frances Okafor was in the seat where she and her husband used to sit, and someone had put a small vase of paper flowers on her two-top. And it did not wobble any more because Sutter had gone in the night before and shimmed the leg. Lorna Brant was there in her county coat with her glasses on their chain, drinking coffee like an ordinary person, watching the room she had helped save fill up with the people it was built for. Elias Maddox got out of the truck slowly. He had put on the uniform again. It was not the 22nd of the month, but Booker had not said a word about it because he understood that the old man was not wearing it for Carl Reyes today. He was wearing it for himself, for the right to walk through a door in it, a right that had been taken and given back. He squared his shoulders the way he had squared them on the cold sidewalk 11 days before, and he walked to the door of the Copper Spoon, and the bell over it rang. The whole room turned, and the whole room stood. It was not a thing anyone had arranged. Gideon Whitcomb stood first, the postal carrier rising stiffly out of his booth, and then Sutter, and then Frances Okafor with one hand on the table, and then all of them, 30 old men and women who had each thought they were alone and now knew they were not getting to their feet for one of their own. As he came in out of the cold, no one clapped. It was not that kind of standing, it was the kind soldiers know. The kind that happens when a man comes back who was not sure he would be let back, and it was the most honest thing Booker had seen in 2 years. Shasta walked in at the old man's heel, calm and unhurried. The working dog who had stopped at exactly one man in that room 3 weeks before and been right about him. She crossed to the booth, by the window, the empty booth, the one Elias had been refused, and she lay down beside it on the warm tile and put her head on her paws, and that settled it. That was the place. That had always been the place. Elias Maddox sat down in his booth by the window. A young waitress came over, the same young woman who had blocked the door with both hands raised, and her eyes were red, and she set down a cup of coffee in front of him, and then, without being asked, she set down a second cup across the table and left it empty. She had learned, someone had told her, or she had figured it out herself, what the empty cup was for. Elias looked at it for a moment, the empty cup set for a man 58 years gone, and then he looked up at the girl, and he said, "Thank you," and he meant it, and she nodded and could not speak, and went quickly back to the counter. Booker stood near the door, with his hand on Shasta's head, and watched his grandfather lift the cup that was for him and leave the cup that was not, and he understood that the whole 11 days had been for this single ordinary moment, an old man having coffee in the place where he belonged, in a town that had decided, after some help, to want him. He thought about attrition. He thought about the word the way Vol had used it, as a thing you did to people to make them disappear, slowly so no one could point to the day it happened. And he thought about what they had done instead, which was the opposite of attrition, which was 30 people refusing to wear off, refusing to be ground down one private humiliation at a time, choosing instead to stand up together in a warm room on a cold morning. The Corps had a word for that, too, for the thing where men who are scattered and beaten gather themselves and hold a line they have no business holding. Booker had not expected to find it in a diner in Halford Junction. He had not expected to find it among old people with shoeboxes of receipts and uncashed checks. Yet there it was, plain as the light in the window. He stayed in town through the spring. He had not planned to. He had a truck and a road, and a habit of leaving places before they could become places he would miss, a habit he had built carefully over years, so that nothing could ever again be taken from him the way certain things had been taken overseas. He had come to Halford Junction to fix one wrong and then go. That had been the plan. He told himself that on the first day, and he told himself that on the 4th, and somewhere around the 11th, he stopped telling himself anything because the truth had become too plain to argue with. His grandfather was old. The town was small. The diner was warm. And every morning Shasta walked to the same booth by the window and lay down beside it, as though the decision had already been made, as though she had decided for both of them, the way she had decided about Garrett Vol instantly, and Booker had learned to trust her about people. He decided that spring to trust her about this. He took a job with the county, of all things, working with Lorna Brant on the small grants that kept the bones of little towns from being bought out from under the people who lived in them. It was slow work. It was paperwork and patience and driving long roads in bad weather to sit at the kitchen tables of proud old people and convince them they were not alone. It was, he came to understand, the same work he had done for his grandfather, only widened out to a whole county, and Shasta rode shotgun for every mile of it, eyes forward, ears tracking the trucks that passed, reading every door before he knocked on it. On a morning in late April, with the snow finally gone and the first green coming up ragged along the ditches, Booker sat in the booth by the window, across from his grandfather, and drank a cup of coffee he did not have to wash himself. Frances Okafor waved from her two-top with the paper flowers. Gideon Whitcomb argued. Zoning with Sutter, 2 booths down. The warm amber light was on even though it was morning and did not need to be, and Shasta lay on the tile in a patch of it with her head on her paws, and the bell over the door rang and rang as the town came in for breakfast. Alias Maddox set his cup down. "You did not have to stay," he said. "I want you to know I never asked you to stay." "I know," Booker said. "You never ask for anything." The old man almost smiled. "Then why did you?" he asked. Booker looked out the window at the clean morning street, at the cleaned sign, at the town that had decided to want its old people after all. He looked at the empty cup on the table set for a man neither of them had met, kept full of nothing in his honor for more years than Booker had been alive. He looked at the dog asleep in the light who had known, before any of them, exactly where they were supposed to be. For some reason, he could not find anywhere inside himself the old urge to be already gone. It simply was not there. It had worn off, somewhere in the 11 days or the spring that followed, the way rust wears off a thing you finally decide to take care of, because a man should eat breakfast where he belongs, Booker said, and so should you. And I figured I might as well belong somewhere, too. The old man nodded slowly. He understood the thing under the words. He had always been able to hear it. Outside, the last of the winter's snow was melting off the awning of the Copper Spoon and running clean down the brick. And inside, the booths were full of people who had refused to disappear. And a Marine sat across from his grandfather in the light, and the dog slept, and the door kept opening, and the cup that was meant to stay empty stayed empty. And the cup that was meant to be filled was full. If you have ever been told there was no room for you in a place you helped to build, hear this: you are not rust. You do not wear off. The world will try, sometimes, to make the people who gave the most feel like they cost too much, and it will do it quietly. One closed door at a time, hoping you are too proud to compare notes with your neighbor. Do not let it. Stand up in the warm room. Set the cup for the ones who are gone, and keep your seat for the ones who remain. And know that goodness, when it is patient, and when it gathers itself and refuses to be alone, is stronger than any man with a tablet and a smile and a word like attrition. May God keep you in the place where you belong. May He set a light in your window against the cold, and may there always be a door that opens to you, and a seat that is yours, and someone who stands when you come in from the snow.